Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go through analysis of the new moon or Amavasya coming up January 11th, 2024. And it seems like the overall theme for this moment in time is forging a new identity. So let's go ahead. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only. It should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. So if you're new to Vedic Astrology, also known as Jyotish, are my videos. All of my teaching videos on the topic are in my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. And whenever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject. Because as you probably know, astrology, especially Vedic astrology, has quite a bit of terminology that's unique to it. And then I tend to flip back and forth between English and Sanskrit. Um, so again, if you see a double asterisk and you're like, oh, what's that? There's a video on it so you can learn more about it. So in today's talk, usually these interpretation videos, I integrate a lot of concepts and probably even more today. There's a lot going on. So these are videos most helpful if you are a beginner or you need to brush up on some of these concepts. North, South, and East Indian style charts. I use North Indian style charts in my work. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. Introduction of the constellations or rashis, constellation or rashi categories, planetary aspects, planetary exaltation and debilitation, nicha, bhanga, natural benefic and malefic planets or grahas, digbala, planetary directional strength, karako, bhava, nashaya, or planet breaking house, nakshatras or lunar mansions, parivartana yoga, which is a planetary combination, and also pravraja yoga. This is like the big one for this particular talk. It's like up front and center, as you'll see. I have a whole video on pravraja yoga, and in that video, the main chart I look at as an example of pravraja yoga is Pope Francis's chart. And I did go into more analysis of Pope Francis's chart in my recent video, January 2024 transits or gochara. But what's interesting is the pravraja yoga we see here in this talk is almost exactly the same as Pope Francis, which is, I think, quite unusual, except for the fact for him it's in the 7th house instead of the 1st house. I also have a whole list of playlist on each individual planet or grahas, and you can find them all there depending on which planet you want to learn more about. And then I have a growing list of houses or bhavas playlist. So each house you can learn more about. And if you're new to the houses, then I would start with the lugna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, or 1st house, because that's the most important one. Foundationally to learn from, but also foundationally for the chart. All right, so a lot to learn. Let's go ahead. All right, so let's take a look at the chart here. So again, this is for the new moon, or Amavasya as it's known as in Sanskrit, coming up on January 11th, 2024. The exact time of this particular chart is 6:58 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the time zone that I live in. So the day lord is Mercury and the hora lord is Saturn. So even with those two planets, it starts to give you some energy, some vibe, right? So Saturn is usually long term, and Mercury can be business or decision. And I think they're both relevant for actually the chart, as you'll see as we get more into it. The shot period at this particular time is Venus, K2, Saturn, Jupiter. So as you see in the chart, again, we haven't even really gotten into it, but if you see where Venus is, it's in the 12th house of loss, and Saturn is in the 3rd house, which is considered a negative house, and K2 is in the 10th house. K2 and Saturn have energies of release, and then Venus is in a house of loss. So Venus, K2, Saturn, it seems kind of funny. There's a moment of focus here on releasing support or old support structures. They're no longer serving. Jupiter, on the other hand, the lugna, Jupiter's the lugnatia or the ruling planet for the chart. It's the ruling planet for the 1st house or lugna here. And so what's interesting is Jupiter is sitting in the 5th house and it's aspecting into its own sign. So it's bringing strength to this lugna, this rising sign, first house ascendant. The other thing is there's a parivartana, so an exchange of houses between Mars and Jupiter, so you can swap those two planets. So that means that this lugna is particularly strong. And this Jupiter here, this is kind of like a breakthrough moment, is what I'm seeing here. But to get through the part of the breakthrough is releasing old support structures to, I think, gain strength within oneself. So that's kind of a nutshell version of the whole chart, but we'll get into details here. Also to note, these dasha periods. So the dasha is a planetary period. These are the planets that are kind of a little bit more active at this time. And so the dasha sequence is going to change fairly quickly here. Venus K2 Saturn period started in 10th of November 2023. So this whole situation here, this kind of breakthrough moment, has kind of been bubbling up for the last couple months or so. And then we're switching from Venus K2 Saturn to Venus K2 Mercury on January 16th, so just a few days after this particular moment. So we're going to switch from the Saturn, obstacles, delays, doubt, skepticism, to Mercury, where it's like decisions, communications, energy. Also of note is that Mars is currently combust or asta. So it's very close to the sun, so you can't see it right now. And it's leaving asta on 17th of January, right after we switch to Shah periods, which is going to bring more strength to the lugna, as well as more strength to the fifth house because of that parivartana between Jupiter and Mars. And then we're let's see, Venus is moving into Sagittarius on the 18th of January. So the next few days, so this moment on the January 11th is kind of a big breakthrough moment. And then you'll see things are starting to roll out over the next few days, is essentially what this means. Because on 18th of January, Venus moves into Sagittarius out of that 12th house of loss. And then there's a big shift. There's a big Mahadasha shift on 17th of March, which is going to be Sun. And the sun represents things like soul and career and vitality, leadership, especially in the form of like being president or king, is typically what it's known for. So March 17th is only a couple months out. So again, first few days after this moment, there's going to be some shifting. And then the big shift into whole new energy is a couple months away. So, so also of note, the Lagna Nakshatra is Purva Ashada. And Purva Ashada is symbolized by a winnowing basket, so a basket where you shake wheat to shake off the husks, which are the inedible part, and then save, and kind of, so you're releasing that part that's, again, no longer serving. So that, again, I think there's some confluence of energy here already. And then you save, you're kind of refining the wheat, and then you're saving the stuff that's truly nourishing. Yeah. And then the moon, nakshatra, is the same. It's also in Purva Ashada. So the whole overall vibe of the chart is this Purva Ashada, like, again, releasing the stuff that's not very useful, and saving the stuff that's going to bring energy and vitality. And this is happening both in the physical world, because this is the Lagna Nakshatra. It's also happening in the mind because of the moon representing especially the emotional or intuitive mind. And the sun is also in Purva Ashada, and so again, the soul, the career, the position of authority, these are all shifting, one of the final stages of refinement here. And then the other thing to note, some context here, is that 3 hours after this particular moment, the sun shifts into Uttara Ashada. Uttara Ashada is symbolized by an elephant tusk. And so there's this kind of victory energy associated with Purva Ashada. And then the elephant tusk is like the piercing, powerful type thrust forward. So after this kind of shaking back and forth of figuring out what's useful and what's not, then there's clarity, a moment of clarity and breakthrough. So already, without saying much more, there that you can see what's kind of coming here. But we will get into more for those of you who like detail. So, yeah, so the lugna here, I always start at the top in the lugna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, first house, and then I typically work around just to keep some sort of a format, logical format here that's easy to follow along. Otherwise, I can get lost in different energies. So the lugna here is Sagittarius, also known as Danu in Sanskrit. It's a dual fire sign. So this is a dual sign is one that kind of goes back and forth. It can flip back and forth. And then a fire sign is action. So again, especially since we have the lugna, the moon, the sun, and I believe also Mars. Yes, also Mars. So 3 planets and the lugna are all in this Purva Ashada, like refining, shifting, sorting energy. And it's kind of going back and forth like a winnowing basket does. But it's like a lot of action, probably even more internal action, because moon is so close, is right on top of the sun or right next to the sun, so or right behind the sun, so you can't see it. And Mars is very close as well, Mars being combust. So there's a lot of internal shifting and shaking and sorting that's going on right now before this final moment of kind of clarity or breakthrough. This final moment of like release. So dual fire sign, and you can learn more about the kind of types of signs if you look at my Rashi's categories video. Dual fire sign is known as Dvasva Bhava Agni. Um, the other thing to know, which I've sort of mentioned, but I haven't used the terminology, is that when you have the lugna, the moon, and the sun all lined up like this, you get a Sudarshan lugna, which brings a lot of power because the lugna represents the physical body, the physical life. The moon represents the mental, emotional life, and the sun represents the soul. So when you get the lugna, the moon, and the sun all lined up, like it's like you get body, mind, and soul all lined up, moving in the same direction. So especially with this like release, it's like, you're kind of releasing the fluff or the stuff that's no longer serving and getting very targeted and specific about your energy, your purpose. The other thing is, not only is there like a kind of an alignment of body, mind, and soul, but the lugna is both a kendra and a trikona house. So a kendra house is a house that represents, those are the 4 houses and the 4 squares in the middle. So the kendra house represents conscious action, and a trikona, which are if you look at the top square, and then you move out and see the 2 kind of triangles in this chart. One has a little 1 in it, and the other one has a 5 in it. And then the lugna has a 9 in it. So the 9 represents the 9th constellation, or Rashi, which is Sagittarius or Danu. So 9, 1, 5 in this chart are the trikonas, and the trikonas represent subconscious actions or unconscious actions. So not only are you lining up, lugna, body, mind, soul, with conscious and unconscious. Like this is just, you know, just like getting very clear about, this is just fluff in my life and I need to just shake myself of it because it's holding me back from my true target. Okay. And on top of the Sudar, so as if that's not enough, as if that, so we also already have a Sudarshan Lugna. But on top of that, and I have this in a big red circle, is we have a pravraja yoga. Okay. I have a whole video on that, but if you want two words about it, it means life focus. So we have Mercury, Mars, Sun, and Moon here. The other thing is that you can kind of think of it as having the 5th planet when you do this parivartana exchange between Mars and Jupiter. So that's a lot of focus. Like you're just like, getting rid of everything, that's not truly serving you moving forward. So there's a lot of power in that. The thing too about pravraja yoga, if you watch my video, is that to determine what kind of pravraja yoga it can be, you look for the strongest planet. So if we look at just what's in that red circle, I would say that the strongest planet is the sun, because Moon is combust and Mars are combust. Mercury, Sagittarius is like a neutral sign for Mercury. But Sun, is a friend, or Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, is a friend of Sun. So I think Sun edges us out. Um, but the other thing is, if we think about Jupiter coming here, then Jupiter would definitely be the strongest planet because it's in its own sign. So kind of in my mind, I'm thinking, well, maybe Sun, maybe Jupiter. Either way, we're looking at a pretty illustrious, focus here, because if we consider Jupiter to be the strongest planet, Jupiter, and again, this is very similar to what Pope Francis has. So if you want to check his chart, I have the pravraja video talks about his specific pravraja, not the whole chart. But then my last Gochara transits video, January 2024, you'll see a picture of Mickey Mouse on the screenshot or whatever. Goes into more of his whole chart rather than just the pravraja. So either way, you can learn more about him and what that pravraja means and why it's so important for him and what he does. But in any case, if we take Jupiter to be the strongest planet, Jupiter is the strongest planet of Pravraja Yoga, and it creates a very illustrious, high-minded, well-respected type of life focus. And if it's the Sun, then that typically, because again, the Sun represents president, king, leadership, authority. If it's the Sun, then this is somebody who's going to be like a king of kings, or a doctor of doctors, or, they're going to rise to the top of whatever this is, that they're doing here. And other people in their profession are going to look up to them. So, yay. So that's a pretty a nice pravraja you're going to have. But you'll see there are issues with this chart as well, as we'll go through. But again, with all of this, so the Sudarshan, Lagna, the pravraja yoga, we're talking power, focus, clarity, leadership. And especially leadership, because the Sun is like the king president. Mars is also there. Mars represents like the commander-in-chief or the CEO. So the two leadership planets are there in the Lugna. So yeah. The other thing to note is that Mercury's there, and Mercury's not just sort of hanging on. Mercury's actually fairly strong and has Digbal, or directional strength. Mercury's in Mula. It's in a different nakshatra. Mula is symbolized by a bunch of roots tied together. So there's this kind of energy with changing over, planting seeds, and like the seed kind of dying to itself to emerge as a full-fledged plant. And Mercury represents the rational mind, decisions, communication, that sort of thing. So there's this like decision, it's kind of vital decision and also communication that's part of this. So it looks like, especially when you get Jupiter, again, coming back into the first house because of the parivartana with Mars, Jupiter represents oration. So Mercury and Jupiter are the two communication planets. Mercury and Jupiter are also the two education planets. So, and Jupiter happens to be in the nakshatra of Ashwini, which is about symbolized by the Kumara twins, who are celestial healers. But because Ashwini is the first nakshatra, the first constellation or Rashi, there's a lot of like pioneer, being first energy here. There's also healing energy here. So this whole looks like announcement decision is really going to catapult, again, if this was a specific person I was talking to, catapult them forward with this kind of clarity and power into some leadership position. So with Mercury and Jupiter, it might be related to education. With Sun and Mars, it might be related to leadership. It's probably both. Yeah. So, yeah. What else do we have here? So, and the thing to note too is that coming into this, like Mercury is currently in Mula. Mars went through Mula. Mercury actually was in Mula, backtracked, retrograded into Scorpio for a bit, and then is going through Mula again. Moon just went through Mula. Sun just went. So we had all these planets who just paraded through Mula, where it's like this, like planting new seeds energy. And now it's like shifting, sifting like through what's working and what's not, and then the clarity moment. So this parade through Mula has been going on for the last few weeks. So it's like, after considering who you truly want to be and gaining clarity and insight on all fronts, because again, um, all the planets except Saturn and Venus who own houses are involved here. So this is like almost all the chart is the energy of the chart's getting pulled into Lugna. And it's like harnessing, all that energy into a single purpose. There's going to be new thoughts, communications, actions. Right now, there's still this internal gathering of strength and courage for this final push. The other thing is that it seems like there's going to be the shift from kind of like because again, the sun's in the middle here, which represents career, and then the Mercury is lord of both the 10th house of kind of more 9 to 5 job type career, and also the lord of the 7th house, which is independent business. Um, and the sun is also lord of the 9th house, which is can be related to government related business. So all the career planets for this particular chart are in this pravraja yoga. Thing that was, it looks like there's an upgrade here. Not only is there like a new movement, but there's an upgrade. So it seems like potentially this person with Venus in the 12th house, there's this like almost kind of shifting from being a consultant, because Venus is like a practical worldly advisor, and moving into, and we're also running the Venus to Shah period here, planetary period, and we're moving into Sun. So the sun is like the present. So this is like and again with this pravraja, like, head of the consultants, like head of a bunch of consultants type thing. So there's that. So shifting from kind of consultant to boss owner, is what I'm seeing here. And again, this is coming from a very wise and informed place, because Mercury has digbala, directional strength. That's, information. So people have done their groundwork here, their due diligence. Jupiter aspecting in the Lugna, again, that's wisdom, intuition. And also probably a spiritual element as well, because Jupiter is a spiritual planet. To create, so all of this shifting through the last few weeks is coming to a head to create this new identity. And again, with releasing what needs to be released to move forward. So again, that's the Venus K2 Saturn. And with K2 in the 10th house of career, that might actually be either because K2 is in Chitra. Chitra is symbolized by a gemstone, and the facets of that kind of give this energy of like architecture. So either there's a restructuring that's happening with the career, or there might be like a leaving. And I'm guessing from this that there might be a leaving of career to potentially develop your own business. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing here. So, to summarize all this so far, just in the Lugna, this is about putting all of your eggs in one basket, and that basket is you. That's what I'm seeing here. So let's look at the other houses. So if we move counterclockwise to the second house, well, we can kind of do the second house and third house together, because the lords are the same and there's nothing else aspecting there. So the lords of the second and third house are the Saturn, which is Swa. It's in its own house. It's very strong. It's in Satabhisha, which is translated as 100 healers. So there's some difficulty here with communication, because the second house and third house are both about communication. Saturn is also a very kind of traditional, formal type of planet. So what I'm seeing here, especially in the third house, is there's a formal communication about some issue. And so I could see this as like a resignation letter, which corresponds with the K2 and the 10th house of career, of, releasing and restructuring. Maybe it's a formal complaint, where it brings attention to the management. If somebody's staying on in a company, like, um, this needs to change, otherwise I'm out of here. Essentially could be the letter, before, things happen here. The other thing with Saturn in its own sign, there is some strength, but the third house also represents courage. And Saturn is not a very courageous, I would say, planet. It is a very enduring planet, but it's not very courageous. It actually, you can associate skepticism, doubt, worry, anxiety, depression here. So part of, again, since we're moving out of Saturn Antara sub-period here, I think part of what's being released is like old anxiety or worries about putting in like a resignation or putting in a formal complaint to shift and change things to move forward. Yeah, so let me just see here. Yeah, so that's kind of second and third house all wrapped up together. Fourth house, we have Rahu and Revati, which is also aspected by Mars. So those are two malefic planets. So there's probably some challenges in the fourth house, which represents things like home, mother, education, happiness, even. There's also this drive there because we have Rahu, which is a very ambitious planet, and it's in Revati, which is about hospitality and traveling. So again, there's like this movement energy. Mars is also aspecting in here, and Mars is about innovation and being rebellious and stuff like this. So what I'm seeing here is like there's this rebelliousness to old ways of doing things, traditions, maybe through home, although I wasn't really looking up too much on home. Um, uh, but it's kind of going against the old patterns here to find one's own happiness. There's a there's a drive towards happiness, but through kind of releasing old traditions to create a new one. And again, the fourth house can also represent education, which I'll look at in the amshas or divisional charts, cars, vehicles, so disruptions at home. So we'll look at that, and, tease that apart with the amshas or divisional charts. The fifth house here, we have Jupiter. You consider Mars here with the parivartana between Jupiter and Mars, and we have this like massive Saturn and Satabhisha aspect here as well. So the fifth house represents, that intellect. So I could see here with this movement forward, with this new identity, you have to change your mindset because again, if you don't change your mindset, if you don't change the mindset, you don't change your way of doing things. And if you don't change either, then you're going to keep getting the same thing that you've already gotten, most likely. So, and developing new mental processes and guidelines, because again, especially with Saturn and Mars in this house, Saturn and Mars together kind of give me like an engineering combination. Mars in its own sign in Aries, that's going to be a lot of innovation and pioneering energy. And with Mars and Jupiter there, you can also think of this as some sort of legal stuff. So that may be like considering the legal stuff of, again, it looks like, I haven't gotten there yet, but again, potentially developing an independent business, or if not that, then maybe the resignation letter, the letter of complaint. Maybe it's a good idea to get some legal counsel on that to make sure that that goes over well and you're within bounds without doing self. Um, um, yeah. Um, the other thing with this Jupiter in the fifth house is it creates a karako bhava um, which can indicate problems with the people associated with that house. And so the people typically associated with the fifth house are children. So there may be issues with children. There could also be problems with pregnancy here. Because one, Aries is a fire sign, and fire signs can sometimes be problematic for pregnancies because it's so fiery, it can dry up tissues. The other thing is, again, Jupiter with the Karga Bhavanasha. And then we have this massive Saturn aspecting here from Satabhisha, so difficulties with health, delays with health, that sort of thing. With this parivartana, and Jupiter being one of the planets in the sub period, this could potentially be somebody who's been having problems getting pregnant who announces that they're finally pregnant, which would change, would put somebody into this pravraja sudarshan, lugna energy because, especially if they're like a first time parent, that's like completely changes your identity. So there could be, looks like there may be issues with children pregnancy here potentially. Somebody who's been trying for a while, who may finally get good news, potentially. But again, we'll look at the amshas. The sixth house here, um, The lord of this is Venus. It's aspected by Venus, so that's kind of nice. I mean, Venus is in Jyestha nakshatra, which is kind of a defensive type energy. It's symbolized by a talisman. So with Venus coming into its own sign in the sixth house, that's kind of nice because the sixth house represents enemies. So it looks like whatever happens here doesn't look like there's going to be massive fallout with the people around. Like, you might be worried about what your boss is going to say if you do hand in a resignation letter. It looks like it's going to be okay. They might be a little bit defensive, but it looks like it shouldn't be too heavy there. And Venus also represents the 11th house, is the lord of the 11th house of groups, clubs, and society. So again, if somebody's quitting their job or shifting departments or moving up or something, then, the people you've been around with, sitting next to you day by day are going to shift. And so that might possibly be why Venus is in the 8th house. Yeah, so there might be some losses here, but again, smoothed over for the most part. And that may be part of the concern here, is that, part of all this thinking, considering energy is like, how do I bow out gracefully without too much damage to myself or others? Yeah, and then also Venus in its own sign here in the 6th house. That's also pretty good for like schedules and daily schedules and stuff like that. So it looks like there's some protection there. So this next slide is basically the same, just the text on the right is different for the other houses. So the 7th house, so I've already talked about it a bunch, but you can see all these planets in the 1st house are reflecting into the 7th house. So one, that can mean, and especially with Mercury aspecting into its own sign. Usually when I see Mercury aspecting into its own sign, there's an indication or it's a signal for independent business. And this is the 7th house of independent business. So and then you have all this energy. So Mercury, Mars, Moon, Sun, Jupiter too, if you want to think about the parivartana. You're going to have 5 planets aspecting into the 7th house. That's a lot of energy. So again, it seems like if this was a person who's looking at starting their own business or they're in the process of that. It can also mean that this is going to affect the partner, which would make sense because the 7th house also represents spouse or spouse-like partner. So if there is some, like if somebody's married, if you decide to own a business, then their legal status and their ownership status will typically change as well, because they'll be through marriage. And again, there's some protection here because Mercury's going into its own house. It may also be that, the partner is going to be an active player in this new venture. It seems to be happening here. And the partner also has all of this energy. Like for the partner, all this energy is in their 7th house of independent business and spouse. So they're either directly involved in the glow up or they're watching you, level up, pretty closely here. And it is reflecting, mirroring through them to some degree. The 8th house here, we have Mars aspecting into this house. Mars is debilitated in Cancer. So this is a mental emotional flux here. Mars is a kind of an erratic planet and it's debilitated, so it doesn't act that, well as it can. Mars also is it's a fire planet, so there can be anger, frustration, a bit of mental emotional flux here. And the 8th house represents deep psychology. So again, this is kind of that deep, like with Moon being combust and Mars being combust. There's like a lot of this winnowing, sorting energy is happening on a deep internal level. And so we see that again here in the 8th house. The 8th house can also represent, since we do have Mars debilitated here, the 8th house can represent medically things like the gynecological or, OB-GYN system, sexual system, as well as urological system. And Mars can represent things like inflammation or surgery, infection, surgery, that sort of thing. So that might be related to children or difficulty with pregnancy, potentially. It could also mean somebody is getting like surgery on those systems, sexual or urinary system, or there could be an infection there. But I was seeing this mostly as because Mars is combust, I was seeing this mostly as mental, emotional, rather than something that can be seen. Although, again, if it's, the eighth house represents deep internal structures. So just on that level, it might be inflammation or surgery that can't be seen. Um, like maybe laparoscopic or going through, like if it was a woman going through the vaginal canal and that sort of thing, like not having a external scar, surgical scar, that sort of thing. The ninth house here, we have Saturn and Jupiter aspecting here. Um, and Saturn, again, is a planet that represents doubt, skepticism, anxiety. Jupiter is the great optimistic planet. So with Saturn and Jupiter here, it's kind of like, how is my boss or potentially father going to take this news? Because again, it looks like some sort of formal announcement. Um, the 10th house we've already talked about, K2 and Chitra, so leaving a job or reorganizing, restructuring the work you do. The 11th house, I mentioned, the lord of that is Venus, which has gone to the 12th house of loss. So there might be concerns here, because again, there is some concern with this massive Saturn in the third house of courage. This could be like, how do I say? Concerns about loss of income or social support, because that's what the 11th house represents, because 11th lord has gone to the 12th of loss and expenses and stuff like so there may be concerns about losing income if you're moving from a steady paycheck type job to be an entrepreneur. It could also be concerns about startup costs and stuff for a business. But you do also have in the 11th house aspect by Jupiter and Mars, so there's a lot of enthusiasm. So for developing income and social support, group support. But then, is it going to pan out or not? That's what I'm saying here. Is the question in this person's mind. Then the 11th or 12th house, I mentioned Venus and Jyestha aspected by Saturn and Mars. So Saturn and Mars, that can be like again a engineering type energy, and it kind of is like how do we restructure any kind of social or financial losses? Like this is kind of, and especially with Venus and defense, it's like how do we mitigate our losses if there are any? How do we shield ourselves from whatever losses or fallout might happen from this big shift that's happening? So, yeah, so that's the chart. All right, so I went through a bunch of the amshas or subzodiacs or divisional charts. They're all different names for the same thing, so that we can tease apart some of this energy. Although I think a lot of it's pretty clear, just from the natal chart. But so let's look at relations first. We have here the Navamsha D9, which represents spouse. And it's a general kind of strength amsha for the natal chart. And then we have the Draconar D3, which represents siblings below it. So the top chart here, you can see that all of the grahas are well placed. So if there's any concern about spouse, because Venus is in the natal chart, Venus is in the 12th house of loss. So the person might specifically be concerned about loss of social support from spouse. And Venus is in Jyestha, so maybe the spouse is a little bit kind of defensive, or maybe they're kind of questioning a little bit. But we can see here that all these planets, Dasha planets, and that's what I've circled here is that you can. I wrote the Dasha period here, so we're currently at the time of this new moon in Venus, KT, Saturn, Jupiter. It switches to Venus, KT, Mercury on January 16th. And then it switches Mahadasha is the big Dasha on the Sun on March 17th. So this is all coming up. But what I did was I circled the planets that are in their Dasha or coming up in their Dasha because typically the amshas are mostly used for timing. You can get additional information to kind of weave back into and kind of more detail on the birth chart, but they're mostly used for timing. So all of the grahas here are well placed. So already that's like good news. There's also parivartana between Mars and Moon, which supports Sun and Jupiter, which is nice. So it looks like, and then we have the fourth house here, Saturn in its own sign. So home, work, family protected is what I'm seeing. There may be some arguments, though, once the Sun period happens, because you can see Sun in the second house of typically family, finance, and then with Mars there, with the parivartana there. So you can kind of think of Sun, Mars, and Moon there in the second house. There's a lot of fire energy there. There's the president and the CEO. So it's almost like too many cooks in the kitchen, too many leaders. um, and again, we saw from the natal chart that not only is the native a leader, but their spouse-like partner is also a leader because they both have the two fire planets, Sun and Mars, in or aspecting their house. So, it may be that if you're used to just being a consultant, that's kind of a different energy where you can just provide information and advice and then people follow it or not, and you're kind of not on the hook quite in the same way as you are if you're like the boss. And you got to get people to move in certain ways to get things to happen. Um, the other thing is this particular chart is very powerful. So not only is the natal chart person very powerful, but the spouse is also very powerful. There's a hamsa yoga here, that's Jupiter exalted, and a kendra. We have a sasha yoga, that's Saturn uh, in its own sign, and a kendra. We have a sarswati yoga, which indicates like usually education and creativity because of the placement of Venus, Mercury, Jupiter. And again, I do have a video on Saraswati Yoga if you want to learn about it, but all three yogas give the spouse a lot of power. Um, so, you know, well done. It's like, it looks like, even if the spouse is, kind of questioning maybe a little bit or kind of processing things in their own way and you might temporarily not be on the same page. It looks like, this is a pretty strong person to lean on. So that's good news. Then we have the D3. This is siblings. Um, so all the grahas are well placed except Venus. And that's the Shah period we're leaving. So, and the other thing is that Venus is aspected by Mars, which is super strong in its own sign in the ninth house, but Mars in the Cancer, where Venus is going to be debilitated. So it looks like there might have been some issues with siblings in the last Ashah. Maybe they had, issues with work or siblings, relationship travel with this Venus in the 12th house of loss and expenses. But moving the Sun, you can see Sun is Swa here. So once we get into the Sun period, siblings is going to be, I think, things related to siblings is going to improve. The other thing is a sibling might also step up into leadership position because Sun is Swa, very strong leadership energy here. So yeah, because Mars is Swa and its own house, Sun is Swa. So again, it looks like all the people here are, strong leadership people, and if they're used to having their own way or not compromising or don't know when or how to step down, then you can just get a lot of fire on fire. But if people can get along, this can be like a power team potentially. So, yeah. So, spouse and siblings looking good, if not getting better. Then we have the Saptamsha D7 for children and the Dwadashamsha D12 for parents, grandparents. Okay, so this children chart was quite challenged, which again is not entirely surprising given that there's a Jupiter Karko Bhavanasha in the fifth house, and we have that Swa Saturn aspecting the fifth house of children. So let's see. So Saturn is the only planet of all these that's in a positive house, and it's debilitated because it's in Aries. Luckily, Saturn and Mars are in parivartana, so that's going to bring Saturn and Mars up a bit. But still, there's challenges here. Let's see. Mercury helps Jupiter a bit. Mercury's well placed. Sorry, only Saturn. I forgot Mercury. Mercury's well placed, and it actually helps Jupiter because there's a parivartana between Jupiter and Mercury. So that's going to help. But again, the other thing is Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury are all these like sub periods here. Venus is debilitated with K2 in the sixth house, so it's been a slog. Difficulties with children up to this point, and the sun is also in a negative house. Although I think the sun, if I were to say, I think the sun period's going to be a little bit better because at least we have Mercury coming in here to make the house stronger. And you do have Moon and Jupiter, so some nice planets. Although there's some negative influence, I think, from Mars. Um, Yeah, so I think Sun will be a little bit better, but it's still going to be challenged. So what does that mean? And then if we look at this, I mean, Saturn being debilitated and the top, in the lugna here, this is somebody who could feel very nervous, anxious, disempowered, alone, isolated. Venus here in the sixth house, debilitated with K2. This is also somebody else who is not very adept at socializing or is not having an easy time making friends. That's what I'm seeing here. So there could be some like social anxiety, if nothing else, um, or just general anxiety. Right here. The other thing is that, with Mars swapping places with Saturn with this parivartana, that's going to bring Mars into Aries. This is going to be a very fiery, rebellious, hot-headed kid. But again, the Saturn's debilitated. So they might toggle back and forth between, trying to be confident and kind of push forward and then being anxious and depressed. So I was kind of seeing this potentially as a sub zodiac of a kid with special needs. Is what I'm seeing here. And also you have like, was it Rahu's sun, moon, Jupiter, K2, Venus, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 planets in negative houses. This could also be like a balarishta yoga. So again, maybe a child that has difficulties in childhood. Maybe they're sickly or something. And they don't have a chance to really grow up. The other thing is, again, if we're looking at this for pregnancies, Sun is in a negative house. After that comes Moon. After that comes Mars. So maybe in Mars, but that's, potentially years away. There could be some betterment here, or somebody might look for a Saturn or Mars. Probably Mars would be better. Because Saturn's debilitated, like a Mars sub period, if they're looking to get pregnant, potentially. But you'd also have to look at the planet transits for the natal chart. But it just seems like there's few kind of windows for this particular person where their children are doing well or pregnancy kind of takes. Um, so yeah, a lot of challenge here with the children's subchart, which again reflects also from the natal chart. Unfortunately. Then we have the Dwadashamsha D12. This is for parents, grandparents. So issues here too. And only Jupiter and Saturn are well placed, and Saturn aspects Jupiter. So it's almost like the Saturn dragging Jupiter. So where's Venus? Venus is in the 12th house of loss. Sun is in the 3rd house. Again, Sun's looking a little bit better than Venus. And it looks like, again, the D12, the parents chart, is similar to the children's chart, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 planets in negative houses. It looks like there's ongoing issues with parents, long-standing issues. Yeah, and there might have even been some estrangement or something like that with this Venus K2 situation and Mars aspecting there. So you're going to have debilitated Mars with K2 and Venus in the 12th house, loss of loved ones or estrangement from loved ones type thing. Anyway, Sun is in a negative house, but it's looking better just because you have a parivartana between Venus and Moon. So when you bring Venus to its own house in the third house, that's going to provide a little bit of support for Sun. And also the third house indicates change. So, um, yeah. So I think it's a little touch and go with the parents here. And it looks like just kind of emotional difficulties. I mean, Venus is an emotional planet, Moon is an emotional planet. So if when you swap, Venus and Moon, that means you bring Moon into K2 with the debilitated Mars. That's a lot of mental health issues. So yeah, it's tough. And Venus is the lord of the 10th house of career and the third house of siblings. And yeah, so it's I think tough, generally tough story with parents, grandparents here. There may also be more communication if there was some estrangement during the Venus period. You might get more communication once you shift into Sun. So even if it's not a warm and fuzzy relationship or a stable relationship, at least there might be more communication. So that might be an improvement. But yeah, it's tough going with parents here. And again, if the parents are, again, we also have like what is it here? Mars in its own sign in the ninth house of like dad. It's like, if dad is kind of a controlling person and used to having their way, and they might think that, forming your own business is too risky of a proposition, then they may not be on board with this, maybe. And maybe that's the Venus in the 12th house in the natal chart, is maybe that's the loved one who's like defensive or being protective or whatever. Could be. Yeah, so some challenges here with children and parents, looks like. Then I was looking at education and career because those seem like they are probably going to be challenged as well, and they are. So, let's see. So the first chart here is the Satabhisha, the D24. So this represents education. And you can see Venus, the major Mahadasha now, is in the 12th house of loss, and Sun is in the 6th house, which is a negative house. And the other thing is to note of this particular chart is it's the same lugna, Jupiter ruled, Sagittarius Jupiter ruled lugna. That means that this chart is pretty important. So what I was seeing in the natal chart about being problems with education, you can see that in the subchart here. But again, it looks like Sun period's going to be a little bit better. So even if it's not fantastic or ideal, I think there'll still be some improvements here. This Venus aspects into its own house, so it's going to pull up, support Sun here. Plus you have Jupiter and Moon and Venus, so those are all benefic planets. So even if there's still some struggle here, it'll probably get better. The other thing about this 5th house here with Saturn debilitated in Aries, but Mars being Swa in its own sign, strong in its own sign. I was getting from this and then Venus, which is the worldly counselor in the 12th house of loss, and Jupiter, the kind of spiritual or counselor in the 6th house. I was getting from this that you may not be getting good advice regarding education, and that may be part of the problem here. There might be some kind of sort of controlling, authoritative type person who, like maybe a guidance counselor or educational advisor or something like that, who might talk a good game, but I'm not sure their advice is very good because, again, the 5th house is just fairly unstable here, or at least challenged because Saturn is debilitated here, even though Mars is strong. So this might be a fast-talking person, who seems charismatic or sounds like they know what they're talking about, but I'm not sure they're actually giving good advice here. Oh, and then also the Sun, Jupiter, Moon combination, the 6th house. This could actually be somebody who's like an authority on child psychology. So also keep in mind that D7, the children's subchart that we looked at, with the children's chart being very challenged. It might be like if the kids here, because again, this is the kid, right? I mean, the fifth house is also the kid besides an advisor. So, and this Saturn Mars combination is very similar to the Lugna of the D7, the children's subchart. So it's almost like if the kid is having trouble with education, based on their subchart, it looks like they probably are a special needs kid. And so there might be some like psych evaluation or like learning skills evaluation that's important to be done so that the kid gets the proper support, um, you know, medically or through the school system or tutoring or whatever they need. Because again, that's the D7, that children's subchart was fairly challenged. That may be part of what's going on here. So, and then once this authority on child psychology comes in, that may help support things and bring it up. That's what I was saying here. All right. So then the Dashamsha D10 career, well, we can assume there's changes here, but you can see actually Venus is well placed and Jupiter's well placed. So again, Jupiter's the spiritual counselor, Venus is the worldly counselor. So, Venus is probably a good period for counseling, advising, consulting. That probably went well. But the thing is that, what is it? The sun is here in the third house, which can represent change, and it is a negative house, but it's swa. And you have the moon aspecting. You have the moon conjoined with it, even though it's not a strong moon. And then you have Venus aspect. So there's a lot of emotional, I think, supports for developing leadership. So it will be, there may be some growing pains here, but I'm seeing support. And also, like, kind of the transition to leadership mentally and emotionally. That may be part of what's, a little bit less. Because again, if you're used to kind of, if you've been consulting for a while and you're good at it, and, and that, you know that game, then it may not be challenging anymore. And so there's no kind of stress or drag. But once you shift up, there may be, again, just kind of internal growing pains. And then what do we have here? Oh, and then we have Mercury, K2, Saturn. So look, Saturn is in the house of loss, Mercury, K2 in the eighth house of deep psychology. So again, all these planets, it's similar to the natal chart about release and let go, releasing the old bureaucracy and stuff like that. The other thing is that even if the sun period is a little bit challenging because you're stepping into a new role, maybe bossing up here, and then there's the moon. So it goes sun, moon, Mars. And you can see Jupiter is exalted in the second house. It's aspecting out of Mars. So Jupiter aspects into its own sign. So even if sun is a bit challenging, moon is a bit challenging, because some people think like they jump into their own business and it's just going to blow up overnight. And that's not usually the case. So they're not used to, the waiting and uncertainty of that kind of lifestyle. But, if you get there, once you go through sun and moon, once you get to Mars, that should really be strong. So it may take a little while to get there, but it seems like, at some point, and then you go Mars, Jupiter, Rahu. So Jupiter is exalted, Mars is kind of like now in a Jupiterian sign with Jupiter aspecting on it. So that's going to be really lifted up by Jupiter. And then Rahu is with this exalted Jupiter. I mean, again, if you make it to the Mars period, things should really go gangbusters after that. So, just I think be aware, and you have to be sort of overly optimistic to even think about going into your own business. But then when the rubber hits the road and reality is kind of in your face, you're like, oh, I'm used to a steady paycheck. I'm used to paying myself first and everybody later instead of, the other way around sometimes. just to keep the doors open. So, but yeah, I think this D10 is basically similar to the main chart. Okay, then income assets vehicles, because that looks like it's on the person's mind. So the first chart here is the Ekadamsha D11 income. The second chart is Chaturtamsha D4 assets. And the third chart is Shodashamsha D16 for vehicles. Luckily, the Ekadamsha D11, all the grahas are well placed. So yay. The only thing is Venus is debilitated, but it is bhanga. Nicha bhanga, because Mercury is aspecting here. So that improves Venus a bit, but doesn't ameliorate it completely. So, and the sun has a bunch of malefics on it. I mean, Ketu, Rahu, Saturn. So, I mean, overall, good, but I wouldn't say a walk in the park is what I'm saying here with income. But hey, at least you don't have Venus and Sun both, both in the 12th house or 8th house or something like that. That would be worse, I think. Then the Chatra Chamsha D4 assets. So, Venus and Saturn not well placed, but Venus is swa, so that's going to decrease the amount of loss that's been happening. So again, we're winding up the Venus period. So based on that, actually going from Venus in the 12th to Sun in the 4th, there's going to be improvement here. So this is kind of similar because we had Venus in the 12th house aspected by Mars, and Venus was in Scorpio. So again, there's like a kind of protection energy from too much loss of assets. Although there may have been some during the Venus period at some point, but that's ending. So again, there should be an improvement, especially once we get into the Sun period here. Then the Shamsha D16. So I just looked at this because I don't look at it all that often, actually. But, since the 4th house in the natal chart was challenged by Rahu and Mars, I thought, let's look at it. Why not? It's an opportunity to look at the D16. So Venus is not well placed, but it is exalted, and it's in a parivartana with Jupiter. So there have probably been some short-term, easily remedied issues with cars or vehicles that were not really a big deal in the last period. And then Sun is in a good place, so it didn't seem like there were really issues with vehicles here. Yeah, so yeah. Okay, and then I did mention there may be health issues because you had that debilitated Mars in the 8th house in the natal chart. So I looked at the health subcharts here, divisional charts. So the first chart is the Tajik Shashtamsha D6 for acute illness. The second one is the Tajik Ashta Mamsha D8 for chronic illness. And then the third one's the Bamsha D27 for strength, general strength, well-being, resilience. So first chart. Most of the planets were well placed for the most part, except K2. But what's interesting is K2 ended up in 8th house again. So, again, so there may be something going on short term with gynecology, urology systems. It could also be mental health. With K2 and Rahu are both there, and they both represent mental health issues potentially. And they're in the 8th house of deep psychology. So there may be, and Rahu and Ketu, as far as like more physical medicine, they can represent things that are hard to heal or hard to find. So with Ketu, Rahu here, it might be like a viral infection, like maybe HPV or something like. Although that would be more chronic. It could also be Ketu, could also be surgery. So again, it might be some sort of surgery. If we're talking sexual system, maybe like a prostate issue, maybe some, hypertrophic, large growing prostate. Maybe somebody has prostate surgery or something like that. That's, again, relatively short term thing to deal with. Looks like. Then the second chart here, chronic illness. Grahas are well placed except Mercury and Sun. Although Sun is pulled up, I think. So it looks like up to this point. So again, Mercury's in the 8th house. Mercury represents the logical, analytical mind in the 8th house of deep psychology. Um, so again, decisions and communications might be something um, that's like troubling for this person or hard for this person to do, like for people to like call it quits or draw boundaries with people, that sort of thing. Um, that might be just kind of long term difficult for this person and acutely difficult for the person in this moment. Like maybe they're just nervous about you know, pushing the send button on the resignation letter or something like that. Then Sun in the third house. So, that's not as great as Venus Swa in the fifth house. So I think what I'm seeing here is that somebody might, um, we are talking Sun here, and luckily Jupiter is exalted in the seventh house and aspecting into the third house, which is going to bring the Sun up. The other thing is the seventh house lord is the moon. So what I was seeing here is that somebody might, get stressed out, or the lifestyle of, again, if this is going towards independent business, might be really stressful for this person if they've been used to, a steady 9 to 5, steady paycheck type job. It's a totally different, you know, animal, really. Just even like, to sometimes it feels like you've got no support when things are going well with your business if you own your own. Um, so yeah, so I think there's support here, but also it's kind of like as the business starts developing, I feel like that'll um, bring more confidence to this person and more faith. Because I think if anybody has their own business, you kind of know, like, you kind of have to believe in something, right? You have to believe in yourself, or you have to believe in what you do, or you have to believe in, I don't know, the universe, God, or something that's going to get you through because you don't have your boss or the enterprise that you show up to every day, um, is sort of like I don't know, sometimes I think of it as like a false security because you never know. I mean, something might happen unexpectedly and you get laid off or, the pandemic, I mean, that really shifted things for people. Um, so I think that as the person gets used to this, they will be feeling better, but, it's not for the faint of heart, to run your own business, So I think there may be some stress here, but there should be some optimism coming in, and also like the other thing is that businesses can not only be a kind of a means of income and maybe a deliverance of goods or services, but in and of itself, it can be a vehicle for change and transformation. Because again, if at the end of the day, you're really relying on yourself and potentially your connection to some higher power, um, you kind of you don't have to, but it is an opportunity, I think, to get closer to God and the divine or spirit or however you want to call it. Um, to get you through the tough times because it's usually not like a straight, steady um, path. So there's that. And then I kind of see more of that in the Vamsha D27, the strength, resilience, because again, you have Sun in a negative house here. So the Sun is not well placed. So again, luckily, what is it? The expositor. So the ruler of the house in which Saturn sits is again Jupiter. And luckily, Jupiter again is strong when you see that there's a parivartana between Rahu and Jupiter. So underneath, even though the sun period might feel wobbly, there's this deep, strong Jupiter, like this well of spirits and goodness and faith, optimism deep down that I think is going to keep this person from, sinking because it is sort of a, sink or swim type situation. Um, I mean, it's often romanticized like on TV, but like the day-to-day reality can be quite stressful for entrepreneurs. Um, so, um, so again, I was kind of seeing the same thing with the D27. Like, you might feel kind of shaky initially here until you start to see, some traction with the business and you adjust to new responsibilities and lifestyle. And then over time, this should be getting better because again, after Sun Moon, then you have Mars, which is exalted. This Mars is strong. Mars, Rahu, which when you do the parivartana is going to be in its own sign. So again, if you make it to that point, once this thing starts to stand on its own legs, or you start to stand on maybe the business needs to stand on its own legs for you to see some evidence that it's going to work. Or maybe you feel strong enough in yourself that, if you stay strong enough, on your own, or you feel like you can mentally, emotionally, physically, then, that pulls the business along, because they can help each other and they can also like hinder each other. Yeah. So, yeah. So that's health. And then spirituality, religion. So the top here is the Tajik Pantamsha. This is the D5 for innate spirituality. This is kind of more kind of intuitive notions about spirit, the universe, that sort of thing. And then we have the Vimshamsha D20, and this is for more kind of formal, ritualized, like religion type spirituality. So what's interesting to me is they're kind of similar. So Venus is not well placed in either chart here. So you can see Venus is in the 8th house in the top chart, and Venus is in the 6th house in the bottom chart. The other planets are well placed. It might look like Jupiter's not well placed in the D20, but actually there's a parivartana between Jupiter and Mars. So that's going to bring Jupiter, Swa, into its own house in the 7th house. So again, it's kind of funny. It kind of, these charts, the D5 and the D20, kind of reinforced what I was seeing with the health charts, where there's actually a lot of support that's going to come from the business itself once there's a little time to establish it. Like you have Jupiter here in the 7th house in the top chart, and then you have Jupiter in the 7th house again, Swa, if you do the parivartana. And Jupiter's the house of spirituality. Yeah, so the other thing is that Venus is, again, the planetary period dasha we're moving out of. So it may be that actually going down this road of entrepreneurship actually helps you find religion. It's kind of like, I remember I was listening to some Swami talk in Chicago, and he seemed like the nicest, sweetest guy. And come to find out, he was like a military guy before. And then he mentioned in one of his talks that actually one of the fastest ways to find God is to be in a military, or, that sort of thing, because it's so, there is a discipline aspect, but once you're like on the field, it's like chaos, typically. So the only way to work through the chaos is you have to believe in something greater, or some greater purpose to kind of get you through, Um, you have to believe in the cause or something, something higher than yourself, motivates you and sustains you through all that chaos. Yeah, what else here? I want to see the details. Yeah, so again, I'm seeing actually an upturn with, more positive energy with spirituality and religion, either or. You know, oh, you also see like this in the top chart here. I have Mars aspecting into the 2nd house where Sun is. So there's like this, again, it kind of like the chart. Which chart was it? I think it was the spouse chart where you had Mars and Sun and Moon all kind of energy in the 2nd house. So this could be some, in the spouse chart, it seemed like maybe it could be arguments because of leadership differences or something like this, leadership style differences. This here, This could be like, actually talking about religion more, like starting that conversation and maybe actually becoming a spiritual leader. Because again, that whole pravraja yoga in the beginning of the natal chart, it was all swimming in Jupiter. It was in a Jupiterian sign, and Jupiter was aspecting into that sign, its own sign. And then you had the parivartana with Mars. So there's a lot of Jupiterian energy from the get-go. And so you're seeing it here again. Um, and then, in the D5. And then the D20, anything else here? Let's see. Well, the sun is in the fifth house with K2 Rahu Moon. So again, there may be, again, the motivation with developing like a more formal, ritualized spiritual practice, whether it's like a formal religious practice or not, maybe to help stabilize the mind. Because again, there's a lot of unknowns if you're an entrepreneur. So, there can be some tough moments for sure, and knowing which way to go. Yeah, so again, what I was saying with all these amshas was that they were essentially correlating with the birth chart. Not too many surprises. So there you have it. Thank you again for stopping by to listen to one of my talks. I hope you found this interesting, helpful, and useful as you navigate the own energy cycles of your life. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology and Jyotish are in my concepts playlist. You can find them all there. For individual birth chart readings, I do those on Zoom. If you want more information about that, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine that includes other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that channel is Nature Source Care. So that's out there for you too, if that's useful or helpful to you. So thank you again, and I hope you all do well during this cycle. And until the next one, take care. Namaste.